I see one hand in the audience there.
Yeah.
And but there may be others. So I've got one on the left and one on the right. We'll begin there and let's see what kind of. So there will be maybe more optimism from the audience. I'm feeling increasingly dispirited out here.
Yeah. Thank you. My question is directed to to Fedor. It was very interesting seeing the deliberate destruction of Russian rural populations in the table which you showed over the last century. Now, don't you think this is sad? Because when I look at it, I think it's very sad that you've destroyed your own rural populations and forcefully turned them into urban ones. Don't you think this has led to a certain destruction in Russia and of the pastoral lifestyle and rural populations that you used to have from the days of Tolstoy and what we read in classical Russian literature? And my second question is, in Delhi itself, where we see the spread of the urban, Delhi has spread out to Noida, Greater Noida, Gurgaon, etc. Taking into perspective all the issues that you've discussed, what do you think of this expansion of Delhi into the surrounding states? Is it how does it affect things like jobs, like livelihood, urbanization, democracy? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Thank you.
I'm Seema Sharma and I'm professor in University of Delhi. I have a very interesting point for Stephanie to mention that what she was saying that neighborhood democracy and the role of RWAs, and I'm totally in agreement because I'm also working on that thing. And the framework which we are talking about, that this we need a framework which gets failed of bringing all stakeholders together. Well, we have come up with something called resilience framework at the neighborhood level, which is something called nexus between academia, industry, policy, community, which is basically led by 50 Delhi University colleges in 200 localities of Delhi NCR. Well, I'm mentioning this for you guys to come on board and evaluate it and figure it out whether it's working or not, because I have certain success stories to share, and it's from our perspective we have some certain publications also which you can look up. That is for up to you that how and when we can do this for figuring out this framework to be effective or not. The other thing which I would like to mention that Stephanie herself mentioned, that the neighborhood democracy and the role of local governance and the role of giving voting rights. So now it's again the time has come that let's figure out that how our local people, communities are kind of aware and how they utilize their voting rights, right? So there is a need of a kind of relationship study between what are the needs and issues of the local communities and why they are going to give votes. A kind of relationship study need to be done, because from my understanding there is a huge disconnect and gap with respect to Indian context. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a great panel. I'm just going to shift a little bit towards, when we are talking about cities, mega cities, and we are talking about 100 smart cities in India, what we are doing is we are trying to create some competency between one city to another city. And this competition is all about making it more, smart, digitalized, urban, modernized kind of a, setup. Now, my question is, when we are trying to do that, aren't we going to kill the urban culture of a particular city and homogenize all the cities in a framework which is kind of which is more visible? I say for example in China, you move from Beijing to Shanghai or to Guangzhou. I mean, all the cities would be same. I mean, there's nothing as the essence culture which is prevailing in a city. So how do we govern the cities in a different manner that the culture is prevailing and yet you're modernized? Thank you very much.
Well, S.S. Bhakdi from Institute of UN and UNESCO Studies. Well, the issue of urbanization stands dissected and x-rayed by this panel, through this panel. Well, my understanding is that 90% of the world's larger cities have been built on coastlines. are on the banks of rivers. And it is also understandable that they emit 70% of the world greenhouse gases emissions. After say 30, 40 years, the urban population in the world is going to be 50%. Today it is somewhere 30%, somewhere 70%, somewhere 60%, but on an average, I think it will be 50% after say 30 years.
It's already 50% now.
Oh?
It's already 50% now.
So it can be still more, or it may be just 70%. But my question is, well, Wordsworth wrote a poem in 1848, projected Kendal and Windermere Railway. When England was undergoing railwayization, there was a lot of digging, urbanization, and lot of, destruction was going on. He was very much perturbed. So he wrote a poem, The Projected Kendal and Windermere Railway, in which he said, is there no nook of English ground secure from rash assault? How can they this blight endure? And I have written, being a writer, I have written it as world's first environmental manifesto in the modern times, written in 1848.
So the question is, can you actually...
And the question is, why we should not emphasize going back to nature? Because he was a poet of nature, a worshipper of nature, a lover of nature. Going towards urbanization, I think it is not going to be a practical process in the current times, in the modern times. What we require is, I think, back to nature, back to rural hinterlands.
Yes, we get that question.
Thank you.
And as Fedor said, half of Russia spends half its time with nature and the other half in the city. And maybe that is one way of proceeding forward. Yes, could we have, let's take this, okay, let's have this final round, yes. Just get through and then we'll, I know Stephanie has a question. I don't know that Professor Alwalia has one.
Sir, my question to all the panel members is, because you represent the brick, I suppose, bricks of CPR or something like that. So, we talk of urbanization. CPR bricks or brick CPR, anything you can call it, sir. So my question is that you have given the dimension of urbanizations at various continents. And we all know that urbanization is in dire straits. That is also true. But please tell me, why can't we have? I have been a student of public administration. I have studied urban government administration. Why can't the county council members can be given a refreshing course about how to deal with the new technology, about with the corporate world? If we go there, explain that the technology also, they are not there to listen to us, neither they take up the development work. So the urbanization remains in dire state. So how can these people be educated from the level of the government to get the urbanization in a better position?
It's interesting in the sense that I think across these areas there will be very different levels of competence of local officials. India, of course, we complain about the competence for local officials. But if you look at these cities, there is a great deal of competence, very high levels of competence actually. And somehow I don't think that they've come to very different outcomes from where we have started. So one is not quite sure that is the solution. But Stephanie, you were also planning to ask something to somebody.
Yes.
Or maybe the audience.
I wanted to ask you, Kazuo, about participatory budgeting. This is one democratic innovation that is world famous, and of course, Porto Alegre is supposed to be the capital city. But I think what I know of the Porto Alegre experiment comes from literature which centers on the issue of participatory democracy. So I guess the view is a bit partial. And I would like to have your, first of all, is there a participatory budgeting in Sao Paulo also?
No.
And then, what do you think of this experiment? I mean, this has been taking place in several cities in Brazil. Do you think it has improved governance on the whole? Or
Yes,
not?
for sure. In my opinion, the participatory budget contributed a lot to make the civil society more strong, to involve the civil society in the governance process. The participatory budget, in some way, organized the people and educated them, informed them about how to participate in the governance process in local levels. So, my point of view, it was a very, very good experience in the Brazilian cities. I don't know why the local governments abandoned all these experiences, because if you go to Brazil now, a very, very few municipalities practice, the participatory budget right now. But it was a successful history.
Okay.
Fedor, you had this question about whether or not.
Okay, I will answer as
The
brief.
broader story about is there actually, especially since you said Russians have two homes, is there actually a return to the rural approach that we are thinking of? I mean, one of the issues that we are thinking of is smaller cities. And we talked about whether or not the secondary cities, the smaller cities, as in India, which are growing very rapidly, can actually be sites of urban growth. But most of you have come up with urban systems that are focused on large cities. Is there anything that is within the system? Is there anything on the agenda that people are talking about, where people are talking about a smaller city, giving more attention to them, taking things backward, or not necessarily backward, forward, much smaller?
Okay, we'll try to briefly answer, and then we can maybe extend more details. First of all, speak about this rural population destruction. It was really, it was generally speaking, catastrophic result, I think. And I think this living for two homes, to some extent, is a consequence of that. When people, the society in a whole, moved from village to city quite fast. So this feeling that we lose something, that we need just to dig land a little bit, it still lives. I think that, therefore, one thing is just cultural issue is that people which lives in cities, they still need this kind of even agricultural works in their life. And in many cases in Russia now, some villages are start to recovering thanks to the people who not return from the city, but who spend some time in the villages, and they start to invest money, use their education and contacts just to trying to recover this. Of course, there was a tremendous economic loss, I think, because the difference with India, I think that India has a much bigger population, and the density of population is quite high. And they have, as far as I know, population growth, natural population growth. In the Russian situation is that everybody is going to the big cities. It means that around them there will be so-called anthropogenic desert. Nobody is there. So it means that this area is just out of the economy. I mean, we have no any profit anymore from this area. And also maybe just give some words about this possible India Delhi extension. Of course, I don't know much about Delhi yet, but I would say that looking at Moscow, I think that it could be both good or bad. And I think the main thing is that if this extension will going initially, I mean, just following the same pattern, it will be, I think, bad, because we will get more commuting, less greenery, etc. But maybe if you find some new idea, what kind of new quality that Delhi can obtain from this growth, then it might be effective, I think.
It can be faced with experimentation. Yes.
Yeah.
But before we finish, I'll take one last question and then close the panel. Professor Alwani, yes.
Thank you. Our South African colleague on the panel mentioned that the right to sanitation is what is actually given to you by the Constitution, but not right to housing. I just wanted to understand what exactly does it mean to have the right to sanitation given by the Constitution? Does that mean solid waste management, sewage treatment, everything as a matter of right you can claim? And if the state does not give that to you, if you are an urban dweller without sewerage connectivity or sewage treatment, what do you do if the Constitution has given you that right?
Ivan?
Thanks. It's a great question, and it's a highly contested area, sanitation, actually. Partly because of the importance, basic sanitation is so important to decency and to the quality of life. The effect of the Constitution is that the state is obliged to provide people with some kind of sanitation. It's not necessarily waterborne sanitation. It can be a portable toilet. It can be some kind of arrangement that is cleaned out by the state. So it's not necessarily a proper flush toilet system. And so it applies in informal settlements particularly, informal urban settlements where the state provides basically a certain number of portable toilets that are communal, shared among people. And there are problems associated with it because the state often doesn't maintain. So you get a basic provision and then no ongoing cleaning and servicing of these facilities. So naturally they become...
So it's a right to sanitation infrastructure of sanitation services.
That's right, rather than a service. And so it's contested because of the poor quality of the provision. And somebody's ticked the box, we've done it, but access is problematic and quality is problematic. I wonder if I could just comment on the urban-rural thing, because I think that applies very much to South Africa. We find many people, because of the insecurity of living in the city, partly sanitation, partly housing, partly lack of tenure security, many people retain a connection in the rural area as well, which is, it's not just a Russian thing or an Indian thing, but it is costly. Right? It's costly to them to maintain two houses. It's costly in travelling backwards and forwards. The distances are often very substantial. And my view is very much that people should be encouraged to make a commitment either way, right? And that if they had a better living condition in the city, that they would recognize that their future lies in the city and that they would commit to investing in decent housing alongside the state, the role of the state, and that would be a much better outcome than maintaining this divided situation. So people must be given the right, and the issue of choice, I think, is fundamental. We haven't talked about that really this afternoon. Giving people the choice about where they live.
But what you just said,
and a real choice,
is the kind of conditions that people live under in cities, including the one that you just mentioned.
A real choice means having basic, decent living conditions in the city. It's not a proper choice if they're living in a slum where conditions are atrocious. In order to make a sacrifice to get a job, they're having to tolerate inferior living conditions. So I think that's where the policy should focus on giving people basic, decent conditions in which they can exercise a choice. And I think people would vote with their feet in that situation and end up committing more to the city and investing in the city, and you would then get the virtuous cycle, right, of household investment, better living conditions, more jobs, and the state could reinforce that process, and that's my view of why urbanization is a positive thing. You'd get that sort of positive cycle, and the economy would also reinforce if there was investment in economic infrastructure to reinforce the agglomeration potential of cities and create the positive connection between urbanization and development.
And we have to figure out how to prevent the cities from creating the kind of backlashes that they seem to be creating in many parts of the world. But with those words, we're going to move to the next panel, and thank you very much for being with us. As we can see, the issues have been quite complicated and a lot of discussion took place with very little solution in sight for the urban question. So I guess we still have a job to do. Thank you.